But yeah, so we're going to be talking about ECS and Octopus Deploy. I did a stint at Octopus Deploy recently, and this is one of the things that I went ahead and created a webinar for. So this is essentially the extent of my learning on these particular subjects here. So it's definitely an interesting topic. I'll let you take the photo first before we move on. So a little bit about me. I'm actually a freelance IoT consultant, and you'll see that there's not the word DevOps in that. And in fact, if you know anything about IoT, there's not a massive amount of DevOps in IoT, but there's a huge amount of cloud in IoT. That's the I part of that. So you will find certainly provisioning architecture like that will involve a fair amount of IoT. I'm also an Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer and a Pluralsight author and a meetup organizer and lots of other things, because it seems as though I don't need to sleep. I also organize a few meetups myself, which I'll mention right at the very end. I'm a STEM ambassador as well, actually. I don't know if you get STEM ambassadors over here, do you? Yeah, that's great. I mean, this is driven by the fact I've got 2 little girls at home. So making sure that access to this sort of information is available to everybody is really important to me. So it's one of the motivators for doing talks like this generally. So normally I'd have like a slide of what are we going to do, but I got bored of telling people what we're going to do then actually doing it. So I'm straight into it. So what is Octopus Deploy? Well, they form part of your CI/CD pipeline. So they don't do all of it. So the deploy part of that will tell you that that's going to fit in where the CD is. So the reason that they're so good at what they do in this respect is that that is all they do. So they can make that deployment part really good. So the whole reason for the product is that you can automate those repeatable processes that, geez, you don't want to be doing in scripts every day, yeah? And they have this concept of releases, and within your releases, you have your deployments, and then you've got something called runbooks as well. And one of the great parts of Octopus Deploy is that visual element, so you can see what you've released, when you've released it, how it was released, who released it, what went wrong when it didn't release properly, and things like that. And that's one of the things I think sets Octopus Deploy apart from some of the other deployment mechanisms, shall we say. Runbooks on the end there, I wanted to talk just a little bit about that, because that comes into what we're talking about tonight. These allow us to be able to separate some tasks that you wouldn't do as part of a normal deployment. And they're actually held within a project, so you can have multiple runbooks and multiple different projects with multiple runbooks in them. And if you imagine that it'd be things like perhaps populating the data in a database, seeding a database, or perhaps just standing the infrastructure up that you're going to use for something. You don't want to do that every time. Or maybe say a VM has stopped and you just got a script that reboots it or something like that. Having this in a central place that anybody can access is a really powerful feature, actually. So you can then delegate that responsibility to somebody that perhaps doesn't want to have a PowerShell instance on their machine, or at least know how to use it. So we'll be using, or at least I'll be showing you how you can use runbooks to be able to use CloudFormation later. So this is a getting started. So I like to bottom this out at a level, because there might be some folks that have never used Docker, for instance. So we'll start there. There may be folks that have, and you can just listen along at this point and correct me if I'm wrong. But they are what's called a standard unit of software. And they allowed us to be able to create a repeatable instance of any particular task, if you like, a particular piece of infrastructure. And they're lightweight and they stand alone aside from everything else that you're going to run them on. So the idea is that they should be idempotent. You should be able to tear them down, run them back up again, and they're repeatable every time. It should be, in theory, every time you start it, it should be the same thing over and over again, no matter where you run that. Well, you know, it's not quite the case, but at least that's the theory. We're going to be using Docker containers within Elastic Container Service. So this is very reminiscent of what is now Kubernetes, but this came before Kubernetes. So ECS was a way that AWS decided to be able to manage containers going forwards. I actually think it's because of the fact that it came before, it's simpler to be able to manage it. The concepts just seem a little bit easier than AKS or EKS or any of those container management services. Does anybody use this, and does anybody use Kubernetes, and does that sort of flow with what my thinking is there? Does anybody use Kubernetes? Surely somebody uses it. Oh, good. And how is that? Is it not bad? Yeah. If you use ECS as well.
I have, and I think you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they had as much to cover at the time, and I think obviously the open source community got involved with Kubernetes, didn't they? And poof, does everything now. So, yeah, that's just my interpretation anyway. You can actually do container ECS with either EC2 or Fargate. There's going to be a cost benefit that you're going to have to do there. EC2 is great because you're going to be able to configure that exactly as you want. Fargate, if you've not used that, that's a serverless equivalent. So it's just going to do all of the management and the scaling for you. You don't have to worry about that side of things. And that's what we're using actually is Fargate. But it could be that you need a little bit more configurability in your projects, and that EC2 version is going to be how you're going to do that. But because we use Octopus Deploy, and the step in Octopus Deploy is going to be deploying through CloudFormation and Fargate, then that's what I'm using. And as I just hinted at, CloudFormation is going to be a big part of this. So use CloudFormation to be able to deploy the various different parts that I'll go through in a minute of your ECS infrastructure there. We've got a really nice, over at Octopus Deploy, really nice opinionated step, and you just fill in the relevant piece of information and it will then handle everything else. So you don't need to write your CloudFormation script to be able to make this happen. It will handle all of that for you. It's pretty nice. So just so we can go through some of the terms that you'll hear, we've got ECS itself, and then we've got the concept of clusters. And if you imagine a cluster is just a way to be able to capture all of the parts of your solution in one little place, if you imagine. Within a cluster, you've got a service, and beneath services, you have tasks where your containers are. The service's responsibility is just to make sure that the task is there. If it's not there, it will spin it up. And you get to tell it how many of those tasks that you want. And within a task, you can have multiple containers if you like, as many as you like. And then you can have multiple services with multiple tasks and separate them out like that. So if you've got like a microservice-based architecture, then you can split them up like this if you wanted. And you could perhaps contain like parts together within a task down there and split the other ones out as much as you like. And then if you like, you can have more than one cluster and all of that repeated ad infinitum. So that sort of just gives you some idea of some of the terms that we'll see, and we'll come back into that in a bit. What I'm going to be showing you is obviously going to be ECS in the middle here. Within that, obviously, you can either use Fargate or EC2. It is still going to be something underneath there, but Fargate is what we're going to be using. Onwards from that, we've got across on the left, Octopus Deploy and its runbooks. We'll be using Docker Hub, so I've just already pushed some images up there, and I'll show that I can update those and pull this all through in a bit, assuming all the demos work. And then we've got CloudFormation on the edge here, and both runbooks and our deploy process from Octopus Deploy will be using CloudFormation. And then that feeds into our overall solution at that point. Now, you could, if you like, host your own database in a container. There's nothing really wrong with that, but geez, we've got the power of AWS here, so we'll be using RDS and letting that deal with it, because if you want to scale, it's going to give you that ability out of the box. You don't need to worry about that. And what happens when you kill your database instance and want to spin it back up again? Now you've got to populate the data, and complicated. This just makes life a bit easier. Another thing that I've added on the top to make things a bit easier for the demo, but we should at least try and be a little bit production-y, is a load balancer on the front of this. So you don't need one, but geez, why would you not put a load balancer on the front of your solution? What it does for me is gives me a static DNS that I can just go to. Every time you update the clusters in the EC2 instance, you'll get a new IP every single time. So yeah, that makes the demo a little bit more difficult to do. Go ahead.
You use the image store in Amazon.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, you can point it at what you like, essentially. I'm pretty sure you could even use the Azure one, but that might be a swear word here. Funnily enough, I had an Azure t-shirt on yesterday, and I thought, I'll wear that, it's all right. But no, I don't think it would have gone down well. Would have been allowed through the door, some facial recognition. So yeah, we've got all of that lot. But yeah, any registry you like. I just like Docker Hub. And then, of course, we've got access to that load balancer from a static DNS, as I've said. So that is all the slides, aside from the links at the end. This is where it can all stop going wrong, yeah? So get your laughing boots on. What I'm going to show you first, actually, is the solution that I've got deployed. So this is Octopus, which is a multi-tier application that just a demo from Octopus Deploy that they use to be able to demonstrate the various different ways that you can deploy applications. It's that simple. You just buy yourself a pet. This is how you buy pets, isn't it? You can just add them to your cart. And then when you've done that, you don't fill your details in and you just submit and finish. It's pretty simple. I mean, laughably simple, but actually there's several parts to that. So we've got the web front end, which is great. Underneath that, it needs to know it can pull these products from somewhere. So we've got a product service. And then when you add one of these things to the cart, we've got a shopping cart service as well. The database data needs to be seeded into the database somehow. So there's actually a little DB up database service in there as well that just runs once, seeds the data, and then dies. And you'll see that as we go through. So that just gives you an idea of sort of how this project's going to hang together. So if we go back over here, this is the application. And if I zoom in and we have a look, so here at the top, we've got that database project that I mentioned before. So this is just, it's not a database. So this isn't a SQL Server container we've got here or anything. This is just DB up, just going to populate those little pets into there for us. Below that, we've got the product service, and that is what we're calling into to grab those bits from the database. We've got some tests because, you know, if I didn't put tests in there, somebody would put their hand up and say, "You're terrible, get out, man." So I put that in there. I don't think there's actually any tests in it. So that's the best sort of test. You know, you can tell your manager, "We've got tests. Look, we've got a project just for tests." We've got the shopping cart service then, and then we've got the web service at the front there. So that just shows you sort of the concept of how I've broken this up. And of course, you know, that's all running at the moment locally. And I've got a local SQL Server instance running, and that's where that data's been pulled from. It's not running at all now because I've stopped it. But what we can do is actually we can make our way towards Dockerizing at this point. And if you've used Visual Studio before, you'll know that it's got really good Docker integration, and we can integrate with our local Docker desktop instance, which is what this next part is. I'm actually going to start this up, and then I'm going to just, because some folks may not have seen it, I'll just walk through the Docker files and you'll be able to see how that's built. But as with anything, these things take time to run up. So if I run it up first, then at least I can talk and we don't have to sit down and wait. There'll be a fair few times I'll have to do this. You've all done DevOps, yeah? It's not fast. But never is when I do it anyway. Jeez. If you can make it faster, then please do tell me. Right, so I'm just running that up in the background. That'll do its own little merry game in the background. Just going through this, and shout if you can't read that text. I don't think that's too bad. Is that all right, folks? Yeah, okay, good. So this is listing out the different services that we're going to containerize essentially. Now, I mentioned right back at the start that I would containerize a database. Well, I am in this case. And the reason why is that this can be really handy if you don't want to pollute your local operating system with a SQL Server instance or something like that. So you can absolutely do that here, and it'll just pull your best. Actually, really easy to do it this way. It pulls down your the image directly from Microsoft, and that's using 2019. All of that finished. And then we map some ports here. So we're going to map internal ports to external ports, just so that we can access this thing. Look, my password's really strong. So that'll be the password that we're going to set for that. I put an underscore in it and a capital. It's all right. I can live with that. Next up, we've got the product service, and we're going to pass in the connection string to our SQL Server instance. So that data source just refers directly to the name that we've given to our container there, look. And then a little bit further down, we're using a Dockerfile, which is essentially the Dockerfile of this, look, see across on the right-hand side. That's just what it's going to be using. So I'll show you that Dockerfile in a minute. Not the product service one, the web one, same thing. And so here are how we're going to expose those ports. So internally, we'll be running on port 80. Externally, we'll be running on 5014. So if we want to access that container, that is the port that we're going to do externally. And that will map internally to that port on port 80 and 443. This depends on, that just means that, look, don't do anything until that database container is spun up. Because, you know, what's the point of trying to connect to it when it's not there? So actually, you'll find right at the bottom is database down here. So I want you to populate the database, which is what this is doing, before you actually try fetching any data from it, which makes a lot of sense when you say it out loud. Next, we've got the shopping cart service, and we're passing in, again, that data source because it still needs access to the database, mapping some more ports. We've got another reliance on the database because, again, we don't want to do anything until that point. And then we've got web, and we've got internal environment variables here that we're mapping, and we're just saying you can grab the product service and the shopping cart service from there, and we're going to be accessing you on 5000 and 5001. You'll notice that actually all of these are running on 80 and 443 internally. I've seen folks map different ports internally. Is there any reason why you do that? Because I think just keep it all on the right 80 and 443 internally, and then do the mapping. Is anybody here not doing that, and why aren't you doing that? I want to know. Nobody is. If you're doing Docker, do you leave it on 80 and 443? Internally, yeah. Weirdly, I've seen folks not doing that. I can't understand it. Well, yeah, but it won't do internally, of course. So, I mean, why would you change the port? Just, I don't know. Yeah, well, I was hoping I'd come here and learn something. I've just learned that folks are weird. Right. Rather than 80. Yeah. That kind of makes sense, I suppose. Okay, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. I did learn something like that. See? So I'm hoping that's running. So if we go to, let's go to the, right, let's go back here. Yeah, so that's running. So that's now running on port 5001, and it's exactly the same, which is nice. I'm happy with that. So good. These Docker Compose files, you see, they're actually looking at a Dockerfile. So I've got one of those open here. So again, folks, some of you may have done this already. Don't worry. Some folks may not have. So at the top, you'll see there's a from statement. And actually on line 5 and line 13 and line 20, there are more from statements. The way that these Docker files are broken down is into little layers. And it's really efficient when it does that, because look, half of this isn't going to change. The only part that's really going to change is your code that gets compiled. When you're pulling in something like the SDK, that's not going to change all that often. So it leaves that layer alone. It doesn't need to do anything with that layer. But of course, you still need to pull it in at some point. So it pulls those various parts in and then uses them. We've got a working directory, and we're going to expose those 5000 and 5001 ports. Actually, it's irrelevant to me at this moment in time. We're actually going to pull the SDK in because we're going to build the project directly in there. And there's our project. And then we're going to copy that to a published directory. And then here we've got some environment variables that we've set up. And then after that, we just set the entry point, which is, what do you want me to run when it's done? So not a huge amount to worry about in one of these files. And actually, most of it tends to get scaffolded for you these days, or there's a one you can just download and put your own bits into. But I just wanted you to see that, because you'll see some of this in a bit, because things like that expose are important later on. So you can see those in there. So that's good. So that's running, and it's running in Docker. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually going to make a change and build those Docker images, and I'm going to push them up to Docker Hub. And that process can take a little while, but it shouldn't be too bad. So I'll just put an extra piece in here. I can type. Welcome to Perth. And then down in this developer PowerShell, don't worry too much about being able to see what it's saying now. I know that text is a little bit small. When I don't think I've ever tried to change the font size in that developer PowerShell before, but you thought you'd be able to do it from fonts in here, but you don't, because then that changes the fonts for the whole of Visual Studio. And don't do that, because it looks silly. So this is going to build all these pieces up. And thank God I connected to your Wi-Fi, because when I tried to do it on my hotspot earlier, it was taking a very long time. So yeah, thanks for that. So this is going to build all these things together. This process is usually quite quick, as I say, unless you're on my hotspot, and then it can take till next week. Not bad. So this is going to build all of those individual Docker files together. I mean, I've only modified the web one. So yeah, in theory, I could just build that one on its own, but I didn't want to make the demo even more complicated than it needed to be. And none of you are rushing away. So we all like watching this, don't we? And you do DevOps, so surely that's all you do in your job, isn't it? What are you doing now? Building, deploying. No, you're not. You're on Facebook. That's just about finished now.
So you doing some security scanning desk?
I'm not. We're at the wrong meetup, aren't we? You should, yeah. I mean, when you do this, when you do those builds, it'll do some of that for you anyway. Certainly when you push it up to Docker Hub, they'll do their own security scans. But geez, you want to be doing it yourself. It's interesting. You do something, if you store, I mean, this isn't the way you do it, yeah, obviously. I mean, look, you should be doing this in something like, I don't know, Jenkins or GitHub Actions or something like that. But again, I don't want to overcomplicate this because then I'd have to push it to GitHub and watch all of that not work as well. So, yeah, that's good. Yes, you agree. That's what we should be doing. Next up, I need to push these images up and I need to give them a new version. I'm pretty sure that 19 is the next version. I'm also pretty sure that I've logged in, but if this fails, then it's probably because it's logged me out and I'll need to log back into Docker Hub. You should see, because it's going to be, okay, so some of that interesting. Ooh, that's interesting to me. So it shouldn't be pushing so many of them, because I've not changed any of that. So I'm not sure why it thinks it needs to be doing that. Well, as long as it pushes it, yeah. This process should be a lot faster now, because now it's got to push everything. Geez, at least I'm not on the hotspot at this point. Why is it doing this, do you think? Yeah, go on. Who's betting? Yeah. I'm going to get dinner now. I'll wait for this to finish. That's what folks are doing.
I usually get paid to watch this.
Oh, is this your payment point? Yeah, that's good. I can sit down next to you and watch this. See, the whole of what I spoke about earlier is now being defamed by the fact that it's not doing it. But those that use Docker, you know, this is not what it should be doing at this point. And it is going to the right place as well. So, yeah, I don't know what I've done wrong. Everything.
Maybe because you're using Microsoft images, maybe one of them's changed.
Yeah. Change the hashes.
Oh, those gits. And that would be something it would do. That's possible. And then the whole lot went back now, you know, because you can have all sorts of bits. So, yeah, obviously, yeah. But it's, you know, it's a teachable moment, that sort of thing. Who uses Docker then here? That's a fair few of you use Docker. Cool. And what's been your experience of Docker? Has it worked as you'd expect it to do? Or is it
No issue.
cool? I mean, what you're using it with Kubernetes, I guess.
Occasionally.
Yeah. What is it you do?
All sorts of bespoke things.
Yeah. Cool. I hope you won't do this for more, because it's 5 of them. But having said that, it probably not. See, that first layer is fine, but the rest of them aren't. So, yeah, that's interesting. It is. So, tell you what, while it's doing that, I'm going to move on to ECS, because that's why you're here, yeah? So if I go across, we can actually have a look at ECS while it's doing that. So this is what you'll see when you go to ECS the first time, and this is this clusters that I was mentioning before. So I've actually got two, and this one, if you can actually deploy to ECS from the command line, obviously, and when you do, that's going to sort of come out a little bit differently. This is the one that I've deployed from Octopus Deploy. So within our cluster, we have a certain number of services. And remember, the services job is to make sure that it stands a task up. This one here, this is my DB up, and that's stopped because it populates my database and then stops. So that's why it looks like that. And then if I go into this bottom one, this is everything else. And the way I've done this, I've grouped together the web, the product service, and the shopping cart service together, and I've left the database separately so it doesn't go red. You know, at least I know the stuff that's supposed to be running is running. I can see that at a glance. So we've got one desired task and one running task. We can actually have, you know, more than one of these tasks so that you can horizontally scale your implementation there. Next along here, we've just got some basic information about CPU and the memory utilization as well. If I click on configuration and tasks, we'll get some information about what it is that's actually running in this task. And we've only got the one task at the moment, but again, I could have more than one of them if I wanted to. And if I click into that task, then we'll get some information about what it's actually running underneath. And you'll see some of this repeated in a bit when we do the Octopus deploy part. So we're running in Linux, and we've got like a half a CPU and 4 gig of RAM. You'll need to make sure that you allocate enough RAM there to be able to run your services, which makes sense again when I say that out loud. And then we've got a version down here. We launch type Fargate that I mentioned before. There's some stuff that I've stood up before I've done this that I'm not going to go into great detail with. And one of those is you're going to need subnets, and you're going to be able to need IAM users and all sorts of responsibilities that you're going to need to set up under the hood. The documentation's all out there for you to be able to do that, and it would have taken too long. It's a bit out of scope. So that gives you some like basic idea about what those are doing. And you can see at the bottom here, we've got our web, our shopping cart service, and our product service, and they're running, which is nice. And we can actually see that. So if I go across here, then that's actually the domain name of our Octopus Octo Pet Shop project, and I can add stuff to the cart, which is nice. Submit that and go back. So that's all nice. You can see up at the top here is actually the same public IP address for that DNS as well, and that just to prove that there's no spoken mirrors, that is actually working as well, which is cool. If I go back a step as well, say again. That will be the load. That's the load balancer. Yeah, and that one there. Yeah, right. And that one there is just the IP address of the task that's running. Thank you. Exactly that. So that's how they're working. If I actually go to this task definition, we can see that if you've used Octopus Deploy or a tool like that, actually we've got multiple different versions of this task, and you can switch around between those as well, which is quite handy. And if I go into that 1.61, you can see we've got some information about what this task is supposed to do. So this isn't the running task. This is the definition of what it's supposed to be doing. And you can see then same container names in there: product service, web, shopping cart service, and so on. So that's how they're working. How's this getting on? Well, look, it finished. See, I mean, that's what it should have done for most of those. What was wrong with the database? Stupid thing. So that should have deployed that, which is nice, because the next thing I want to do is actually deploy those changes out using Octopus Deploy. So this is Octopus Deploy, or at least this is a project within Octopus Deploy. You'd start in your dashboard, of course. And again, this is only the deployment mechanism section of what it is you're going to do in your CI/CD pipeline. This is the project that we'll be dealing with today, the Octo Pet Shop project. And this screen here is one of the reasons why I love Octopus Deploy so much, because look, we can see exactly what version we've got deployed. And we can go into that, if you like, and see the overview of what it was doing under those circumstances. Now, I'm going to create a release, and this takes about 10 minutes. So I'm going to try waffle for 10 minutes while this is releasing. Would I like one? Who? Yeah, probably. Yeah, you'll all want one. So I'm going to save that. So this is the process of actually deploying out our Docker containers, really, out to ECS, and I'll go through the process once this is going, because I've got, as I say, waffling to do. Ordinarily, you would have dev and test and staging and production. This is a demo, so I'm only going to do dev. But actually, that's relatively important to note in a second. So that's our release, and I'm going to deploy that out, creating one deployment. And then that will start going. Now, what I'm not going to do is talk you through as it does it, because I'll have to keep stopping every minute and it gets really boring. So I can actually look at the process here on the left-hand side and then hope it finishes before I do, which it won't, I can guarantee it. It's actually, if you, for Octopus Deploy, this is cloud hosted, what I'm doing here, which is why I've got that nice IP address, nice domain name. You can host this locally and have your own runners, your own workers, and it will be massively faster than what we're doing here, which is why it's taking me 10 minutes. If you did this locally on a half decent machine, it probably would take 2 or 3 minutes and you'd be done. No, it's just because, yeah, it's a resources thing from, yeah, I'm on essentially their top free tier, if you get me. You can pay and you can use your own workers along with this, which will make it faster as well. But they just stand you up like the smallest bloody instance that you could possibly imagine, and it just takes ages to do anything. So yeah, that's why it's going to take 10 minutes, but it's fine. It'll work, promise. Just like the database thing I worked earlier. So the first thing we actually do is detect the. I'm not going to dive into all of these steps, but just to show you that they're there. But we're going to detect that RDS endpoint address, and the reason why that's important is, look, you've got this life cycle on the right-hand side, and it could be that you're going to stand up a different RDS instance for each of those. You might not necessarily want to pollute stuff between them. Cross-pollination is bad. So you don't really want to have that as a fixed address either, because you might want to stand it up for test and kill it afterwards. So it could be different every time. So that's what I'm doing here. And it's just an AWS CLI script. And it'll know where to go find the basics of that information, because we're going to give everything a consistent name. And we'll see that in the variables in a bit. And then I echo it out. And these steps are actually quite useful when you echo that data out. And most certainly, if you're trying to fix something that's not worked, you can go and then at least see what it thinks it's done. So echoing stuff out like that is pretty handy. And then we start deploying our various containers out, or at least we deploy those tasks out to ECS. I'm not going to dive into each and every one of those, but we do the DB up. And remember, that's the one that starts and stops. And then we've got our whole Octo pet shop, and we're actually doing that in one block. If you remember, the cluster had that task with those 3 containers running in it. So we will dive into that one. Kind of hope that some of these pages take ages to load, because, 10 minutes. So if we scroll down here, then we've got worker pools and things like that. And this is, as I say, this is a hosted Windows worker pool that I'm just stealing from Octopus Deploy. And then we're running it on behalf of these various different bits, because obviously we can go to dev, staging, test, production, all of those different things. We've got roles. Now, again, this is one of the things I've got all set up in AWS already. The documentation is all out there. Actually, they're getting started with ECS documentation in AWS is good, but it does have a lot of assumed knowledge, because it's like, right, to do this, you're going to need to do all of these steps at the top with no links and no information. So you end up with 120 tabs open on how to do that if you don't know what you're doing. I'm sure you're an AWS group, you folks probably know it. It'd be like, oh, I can do that. It's 5 minutes. When I started doing it, it was a long time, because I didn't know any of that. I mean, I'm an Azure MVP. Yeah, I'm not AWS. Sorry. We all start somewhere. I got there. So see this desired count here. So that was that task count. So you can scale that as much as you like. I only want one, because I don't want to complicate the situation. And then there's that task execution role again. And then x86, x64 is the platform architecture we're going to run on. There's that 4 gig and that half a CPU. So you can go ahead in there and you can configure this to fit your memory requirements. Of course, you're all engineers. You should be able to just calculate that without even running it and it failing you. It'd be easy. Security groups and subnets and all of that lot, you're going to have to set that up yourself in AWS, and then you can fill that lot in. You'll notice throughout this that we've got this hash and this curly bracket, and then there's a matching one on the other side, and that's referring to the project variables. And I'll go into those in a bit more detail shortly. And then we've got subnets, and they're all variables as well. They're not going to change for what you're doing. It's just set that up and set it up once, and off you go. Auto assign a public IP. Yes, it will do that. You'll kill your task, and it at least needs an IP address of some sort after that. Then we've got down here, we've got container definitions, and these are the definitions of our containers, funnily enough. So we've got the product service, the shopping cart service, and the web. And if I click into the web one, then again, I've variabilized everything here. So I'm going to give my container a name. In this case, it's just going to be web. You set up, if you're going to pull it from Docker Hub, it needs to be able to get that container image from somewhere. So you'll need to set up what's known as a package feed somewhere else within Octopus Deploy, give it the credentials, and then it can log in if it's a private repository. And then you just need to tell it what the package ID is for this. And as we go through this, I like this because, it's kind of prompting me exactly what it needs. There's not a whole heap of actual superfluous information here. You'll just need all of this. I'm using default IAM authentication. There's no hard limits on the memory there, but then here we're mapping ports. So there's that 80 and that 443. In this case, that's going to feed into those environment variables, or actually part of that Docker container, because I don't want to put a port number on the end of my load balancer address. So that web one is just going to go straight with 18443. So that's why they're slightly different to what you saw earlier. Because obviously we can't use 18443 on our local machine. That'll never work. And then there's not a great deal of more information down here, aside from this essential tick box here. It could be that, say, that database container, you could untick that essential box, because we don't need to worry about that. When you tick that essential box, that will then make sure that that task is always running. and if it doesn't run, it'll restart it, which comes with its own perils because, until I realised that DB up thing, keeps going over and over and over and over and over again. That's bad. You don't want to do that in production. So there's not much at the bottom of this aside from these environment variables. So we get the product service base URL and the shopping cart service base URLs. And they're going to localhost because actually it is localhost for this service because it's just running within that task. So, and then I stick, the names that we've given them elsewhere. So when you're using Octopus Deploy, always try and variabilize as much as you can, but just don't go overboard because it makes it really confusing. And you can add variables to variables, and I've seen some really, really confusing things. That doesn't work. I don't know why. Don't touch it ever because I don't know why it does that. So yeah, don't go mad, but definitely variables make life a lot easier. So that's cool. So cancel out of that one. If I scroll down a little bit, you can see here's the load balancer mappings as well. So it's going to map to my web container there on port 80, and then you're going to get that target group ARN from the load balancer, and off you go. And again, these are all variables, and it's just slightly more secure when you do that as well. Look, you can give your CloudFormation stack name a name as well, which is good because at least then, I'm not diving into CloudFormation, but when you go and have a look at that, you'll need to be able to see one if you need to go and investigate why something's not worked. At least you know what this is then at that point. So I've given it a name, which should just be Octo Pet Shop, I think. So that's that little piece. I'm going to have a look to see how my process is going because it won't finish because that wasn't 10 minutes, was it? And if it has finished, then great, but no, it hasn't. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about variables. So if I click on variables here, I've got because of UK, I've bought this UK plug and it kind of sticks out. So I've got this nice little box down here with all the plugs in it, and I can't stand on it because the world will blow up probably. So that's why I keep trying not to kill myself. This is, you can have variables that are local, and you can also have global variables as well. So it could be that you've got some thing like this AWS account, for instance. Now I've put it in here, but really it should be in your global variables because you can use it everywhere. But I've put it in here because I just wanted to tell you about that. So that's why it's in there. So you'll have to set up that account to be able to deploy, obviously. Down from that, you can see here that we've got those different CloudFormation stack names. So what's great is about Octopus Deploy is that when you tell it, I'm going to deploy to dev, I'm going to deploy to staging, I'm going to deploy to prod or outline different ways, it knows and it contextualizes the grabbing of those variables. So when you deploy to dev, it's going to grab that variable. And likewise to production and then staging and then test out that way. It's alphabetized it. It's not the order I put it in. So that becomes quite important because, of course, if you're going to deploy or test one on a production one, you don't want to clash. It's the same name. So this gives you that ability to be able to name those things differently. Lots of CloudFormation stuff going on down there. And then naming VPCs and things like that. You can see that's that target group that we used earlier. There's those subnets that we had earlier as well. Database names, you're going to name the database differently too. If you're using variables in here, you can also use secure storage for those variables, which is handy. Obviously we can view it if we want, but that gives you that ability there as well. And yeah, there's the ports for our, actually I don't use these because when I did this, there was a bug in Octopus Deploy that meant that you couldn't put a variable name into there because they'd set the input as number only. So I put it in there and the whole thing didn't work. And then they went, oh, damn it, we've changed something and broken it. So normally this is what you do though, keep it in one place because it's so much easier to change stuff. Because you imagine if you had, I don't know, 7 different test environments, but maybe, you want to change it for all of them together, then you can do it here. But if you did it hard coded, every single one of them, it'd just be a pain. So it really is quite powerful. So while that other process is still going, and I can guarantee it will be, let's have a quick look at runbooks. I'm not going to deep dive into how these things work, but traditionally you will have something like this. So create infrastructure and destroy infrastructure. It could be actually that for test, you could run this create infrastructure runbook when just before you do your deployment to test, spin up your whole test infrastructure, then populate it with, say, that DB up type arrangement there, send out your test infrastructure out and get that all working. And then you've got a manual intervention step at the end of that process, perhaps, and it just sits there. And that manual intervention is, does it work? Yeah. And then somebody else in the deployment pipeline is going to come in then and manually intervene, say that it's all okay, check that off, yep, passes. And then when they do that, it'll destroy the infrastructure automatically. And that's pretty powerful because just standing up test infrastructure can cost you a lot of money. If you don't need it there, apart from when you're testing, why have it? So that's a good use of runbooks here. But you can run them out of process as well. So if we go into create infrastructure, you'll see, if I click on my process, I've got a few things in here. So we can deploy the VPC and the subnet. So we can do that as a job. So somebody doesn't need to learn how to get that done. And I wish somebody had done that for me when I was learning. And then we can deploy our RDS SQL Server database and our ECS cluster. If we go into the SQL Server database, hello. In fact, don't rush. If we click on the template source code down here, and scroll down a bit, then if we click edit source code, then this is a CloudFormation template. So again, I'm not going to deep dive into it, but I guess you folks probably will have used CloudFormation. Sorry about this. Coming from an Azure background, I found CloudFormation quite difficult, not to do, but in Azure, you can export all your resources as ARM templates. And I couldn't do that, or at least I couldn't directly do that in AWS. In fact, when you look that up, when you go to the documentation and say, oh yeah, there's a third-party tool that lets you do that, and you need to give it access to your whole AWS account. It's like, why? Why is that? What do you folks do when my normal process, right, when I'm creating something for the first time is just create it in the UI, and then I export the ARM templates and delete 95% of that, and then I'm all right. It's all right. But for this, it was like, oh, what do? It says, I can't make you a CloudFormation template without a fully populated CloudFormation template, chicken and egg git. So yeah, I didn't know what people did under those circumstances. What's your normal process for doing this? Is it different to mine?
Well, you can just start with information.
Oh, jeez. Like an expert, you mean?
The second part of that answer is not using CloudFormation directly. So CloudFormation is powerful and interesting. You can throw it a million times and get the same outcome, which is fantastic. But it is tedious to run.
Yeah, you're saying like Terraform instead.
Like servers, right?
Yeah.
So a bit more service application model.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, just as a disclaimer, I'm an IoT guy, so I mean, yeah, DevOps isn't my job. So yeah, I'm always happy to learn those little bits there. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. So what's nice about the integration with Octopus Deploy at this point is that you can have parameters that feed into these CloudFormation scripts, and you know that. But they get popped out down here, so you can actually fill them directly in, and you can then use variables for that. And that's pretty powerful as well. I like that. So I've done that for the SQL Server instance name, the database name, and the password. And then you can use that throughout. So you can change it in one place. So that's pretty powerful. So that's that. So anyway, let's have a look. We're going to have to ask more questions. Maybe. What's it say? What's nice about this, when I click into this process, it actually says, look, it started 15 minutes ago and should have finished 4 minutes ago. Thanks. But we can click into each of these, or we can go into the task log and we can see what it's actually done. So half of the time, the problem is, again, I'm leasing these workers and it's got to go and either spin them up or go at least find them. And then when it does that, it's got to pull in a whole heap of information while it does it. If you're using your own, you can cut all of that lot out and just use them. You can leave them running if you like, if you've got money to burn. Look, this is where we're detecting our AWS endpoint, and actually, as part of that script that I've written, I do actually echo it out. But what we're doing at that, we can take those the information that you grab in one of those steps, and you can feed it back into the variables. So then in the next steps, you could then carry on using them. So this step here, yeah, I can see it's already there, but this one's telling me that worked. That's now as part of that project, but it's not there forever. It's only part of this particular deploy. But then that becomes usable elsewhere. And then we scroll down and we've got the DB being extracted and sent over to ECS, and that all seemed to work. It will run and then stop and then run and then stop while it's doing this, which is what it's telling you about there. But it did actually manage to poll it when it was running, and then it was happy. And then down here, look, now it's saying update in progress. Now, I'm betting actually that it is there. When I did this before, it was actually there, and it was just that the CloudFormation stack was still showing update in progress. So let's have a look. Let's see, look, so it is there. So welcome to Perth has appeared. I'm not sure what it's doing at this moment in time that it thinks it needs to do that, but it's actually finished. So yeah, there's that. Well, look, I spelled everything right as well, so that's pretty impressive. So that's gone from my local machine doing it the janky way. You definitely use GitHub Actions or Jenkins or some other. You could even possibly try and do it in Octopus Deploy, but yeah, don't. It's gone up to Docker Hub, and then I've then ran that deploy in Octopus Deploy, grabbed those images from Docker Hub, and then I've populated those over in ECS, and it's all worked. Yeah, that's impressive. It all worked first time. Not bad at all. So that sort of gives you a basic idea of how that all works. And that's the end of the demos. I can go back and check if that process finishes, but look, it's worked. It's fine. We'll believe it. So some links there. That's that Octo Pet Shop project. And it's not the best project in the world, but actually for this sort of stuff, for testing out how Octopus Deploy works, it's a great one because it's going to work, at least so it should. But it's simple enough that you're not going to get this overbearing responsibility of trying to understand somebody else's code. Why is this not working? It's nothing to do with Octopus Deploy at all. If you want to get going with Octopus Deploy, you can do this for free at that address there, octopus.com/start. I'm not going to move on yet until everyone's taken a photo, but actually I've got a link. I've not uploaded the slides yet because, 5 minutes ago I was still changing them. So after this, I will upload them. Docker Hub there, if you've never used Docker Hub before, go check that out. And then there's some documentation there on AWS ECS for you to go and have a look at. If you want to get in touch with me, and every time I do this, I think I should remove that underline because that's actually at the underscore codes. So don't go and follow Pete Codes because it's not me. It's just some other random guy. And if you want to email me, do that. Don't know, just contact me on Twitter because I'm likely to respond. Emails just get swamped with all of those winnings that I'm getting from those offshore accounts. I've got a blog there and I've got some Octopus Deploy stuff on there as well. I think the stuff that I've got on there is mainly deploying to Azure now, so sorry about that. And then I've got Knots OT, .NET Knots So Workshop, Lati, and I'm part of the Agile Engineering podcast. Definitely go check that Agile Engineering podcast out. It's pretty fun. I'm mostly the guy going, what's that? You want about half the time. Someone's got to play that part, yeah. So, and then there's a Twitch channel that is a bit dormant at the moment because folks have got lives and COVID has affected all of that. But if you go on YouTube and look for Azure-ish Live, then there's a whole heap of DevOps stuff on there, as well as myself and a few others run a little show called the IoT Live Show, and we have a few folks come on there. So we've not done a great deal of that since, but you can find that on YouTube. I promise I will upload to them to that bit.ly there at some point, probably before I leave because the Wi-Fi is good and I'm not on the hotspot. And yes, so you can grab all the slides there, and then that's me. So thank you very much. Probably get in trouble because I realise I moved to the side then. I don't know if this is picking me up. So there's folks at home going. Any questions? It's simple. Ask the question though. All right. Is anybody in the room able to answer that question? Possibly. I hear it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's the question of substance and of style as well. So those deployment scripts were very, they're broken down to small tasks. Whereas in code deploy, you're just going to use a shell script as opposed to that.
Is that AWS's equivalent of Azure DevOps?
Or is the
Is it?
It's part of the CI/CD.
Right. Does it do the deploy part? I'm guessing, judging by the name of it, yeah.
The deploy and pipeline service.
Okay. Right. Interesting. I mean, as I say, generally the thing that sets Octopus Deploy apart from all of the other, this goes for Azure DevOps as well, is that UI, that one single pane view of everything you deployed and when it was deployed and if it actually went out and the versions that went out there. That is the thing that usually sets it apart for me. Actually, another thing that sets Octopus Deploy apart from a lot of those other services is their multi-tenancy support. So if you're a SaaS house, their multi-tenancy support is really good. I had to go through a whole onboarding thing when I joined them, and that was probably, out of all of the things they had me do, that was the thing that spoke to me the most, the way that they managed to do that. Because, I mean, if you imagine you're a SaaS house and you've got like 1,000 customers, but you've got the same code base and all you do kind of change the CSS scripts and a couple of images, if you want to make an update that affects all of them, that would be a massive nightmare. So you can get tenant-based variables that will then feed in. So you get all of your regular variables that you change once to change everything that does change once, and then you essentially override parts per tenant on there. And that's super powerful. And I don't think out of any of the other DevOps tools out there that there's something that works as well as it does in Octopus Deploy. But I'm no expert in all of them, so I'm happy to be updated on that if somebody thinks somebody's got a better tool for that. But
another major difference there to your question, Paul, is some of those screens there were effectively wizards for writing CloudFormation.
Yeah.
You're filling in CloudFormation attributes as you're going along.
it finished, by the way. Yeah, certainly. The step itself, that ECS step, that's what I like, is that opinionated step sort of idea where it's just going to point you in the right direction and not leave you with this giant open door that you can chuck yourself through. So yeah, it's that sort of stuff. And there's community-based steps here, so there's thousands of steps for anything that you want to do in Octopus Deploy. And I've only shown you this little tiny tip of the iceberg. Do go explore. If you go on YouTube and just search for the Octopus Deploy YouTube channel, there's a whole heap of webinars on there, and you'll find a webinar version of this with all of the let's wait around for it to do something all chopped out. So you watch that at 2 speed rather than listen to me at 1 speed. But there's getting started with Octopus Deploy on there, obviously, and there's some great talks on there. They do webinars on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, pretty much. So you can go and check them out.